Brahmanda Purana Part 4 Lalita Mahatmya Chapter 23 Five Asura Generals slain. Hayagriva continued, when Kuranda was thus slain by the goddess, seated on the horse, the demon Bhanda said to Kutilaksha once again, in his eager desire for war, "Alas, what could not have occurred even in a dream, what has never been heard before, what has not even been suspected by us in our minds, such a calamity has befallen us." Kuranda and Durmada had been very mighty brothers. The power of this wicked, fraudulent female slave, practitioner of black magic, is greater than we expected. Now dispatch 5 of our generals, beginning with Karanka, along with 100 Akshohinis, to the battlefield. They are genuinely proud of their ability in fighting. They are great heroes, ready to give up their bodies in fighting battles. In every respect they will vanquish that vainly proud woman. On hearing these words of Bhanda, Kutilaksha hurriedly summoned the 5 generals, beginning with Karanka. Directed by Kutilaksha, they bowed down to their lord and master and appeared to be ready to enter even fire for his sake. Blind with fury, they set out from the city. On hearing the tumultuous and unbearable sound of their drums at the time of their departure on their march, even the elephants guarding the quarters squirmed and writhed, as they experienced a sort of shattering of their ears. 100 Akshohinis of soldiers moved ahead with clusters of flags and banners fluttering, horses, etc., stirred up in excitement, and elephants in their rut. It was full of neighing horses and trumpeting elephants. The foot soldiers shouted and screamed, and the wheels of chariots creaked with a rumbling sound. When the dust particles of the ground were raised by the rims of the wheels, they obscured the lustre of the sun. Hence, it appeared to be covered with showers of snow. The entire universe appeared to be covered with dust. In some places it was very noisy on account of the harsh sounds of war drums. The soldiers of the Daityas were overspread with the columns of dust that rose there. Hence the number of soldiers could be conceived in the form it is so much. Banners of many varieties with the emblems of fish, snake, etc., fluttered in the dust columns like fishes in the great ocean. On seeing them rushing at the army of Lalita, all the immortal ones, Suras, became frightened, apprehending breakdown and collapse of the Shaktis. The 5 haughty generals, the chief of whom was Karanka, created in the course of their fight a huge Maya or illusory demoness named Sarpini. The wicked Sarpini created by them was a Ranasambari, or a sorceress of war, of smoky complexion with smoke colored lips and breasts. The hollow of her belly was as huge and extensive as a great ocean. She moved ahead in the battleground, frightening the minds of Shaktis. She was like another vicious Kadru, being the source of origin of many serpents of magical and illusory bodies. She had many serpents serving the purpose of ornaments. Rolling on the ground at the front line of the generals, she made many sinuous movements and screamed in as excessively dreadful manner. It was by means of this very same Maya that those leading asuras became victorious formally. The five evil-souled Daityas, beginning with Karanka, were as if desirous of their own death. Then began the battle between the Shaktis and the enemies of gods. They incited one another's excessively violent fury by one another's heroically boastful utterances. On account of excessive confusion and perplexity, Shaktis and Danavas could not distinguish one another. With the weapons in their hands, they began to strike indiscriminately. The fight between Shaktis and the demons gathered intensity. It became more and more dreadful. When the weapons clashed together, sparks of fire were produced. The series of arrows discharged by them were so innumerable that all the spaces between the cardinal points were hidden and covered up. The gushing stream of blood was so profuse that even elephants were carried away by the currents. Many chariots got stuck up and rendered motionless in the swampy, slushy mire of dead bodies and flesh. Tufts of hairs and tresses floating on the streams of blood shone like gathering mosses and other aquatic plants. It was extremely cruel, destructive, and dreadful on account of the terrific lion like roar. The dust particles increased the gathering darkness. It gave more and more satisfaction and pleasure to the demoness. Blood flowed from the neck and throats of the Daityas when they were cut off by a row of soldiers armed with weapons. Then Sarpini was urged by the five generals along with their army. She created many kinds of serpents from her own body. Many kinds of serpents came out of the body of Sarpini and moved about here and there. Some were like Takshaka and Karkotaka. Some had the luster of Vasuki and other important serpents. Their bodies were of various sizes and colors, and had terrible poisonous sight. They could burn three walls with different kinds of poisonous breaths coming out like flames. By means of their mouths, where two forked tongues moved about, they scattered various kinds of poison in the army of Shaktis. The footnote says, verse 30 to 32 give various varieties of poisons known in ancient India. They had regional varieties like Saurashtra, Brahmaputra, etc. The poisons were Parada, quicksilver, Vatsanava, a strong poison from aconite, Kalakuta poison of another type, Saurashtra poison of very dreadful nature, Brahmaputra a poison of another variety, Sauklikeya, more correctly Saulkikeya, a poison that is produced in Sulkika, various other kinds of poison. Very terrific serpents with two faces and smoke-colored bodies came out of the pairs of eyes of Sarpini. They were extremely furious. Crores of serpents issued forth from the ear cavity of Sarpini. They had yellow color and three hoods. Their mouths were hideous due to their fangs. From the mouth of Sarpini issued forth a number of serpents. They had blue color throughout. They had mouths at the front as well as at the tail end along with hoods. Other serpents of brindled and variegated colors, with 4 mouths and 4 feet, issued forth from her nostrils. They had fierce splendor. Many dreadful red-colored serpents issued forth from her great hanging folds of skin, thick and circular breasts, and the hollow cavity of navel. They had halahala, variety of poison. They beat soldiers in the army of Shaktis. They burned everyone by means of poisonous fires. They twined round them and bound them with their nose like bodies. They struck them with their hoods. Thus they made the army of Laliteshi utterly bewildered and confused. Though they were split and cut frequently by the crores of weapons of Shaktis, they increased in number more and more. They then glided and crawled, regaining the fullness and compactness of their original bodies. Many serpents died, but others were born. At the death of one, many others sprang up. Since the wicked Serpini, the root cause, did not perish, other serpents were produced in plenty on the destruction of serpents originally created by her. On being burned by the poisonous fires, the bodies of soldiers in the army of Shaktis became ruined and overwhelmed by misery. When the troops of Shakti stood bewildered, unable to decide what should be done on account of serpents, those 5 Danavas exhibited many feats of valor. Karanka occupied a chariot to which hundreds of donkeys had been yoked. He smashed and thrashed the army of Shaktis with a discus, the edge of which was very sharp. Another general of Bhanda Daitya named Vajradanta fought riding on a camel, hitting and hurling adamantine arrows. Then Vajramukha mounted a great ass and pierced and struck the troops of Shaktis by the edge of his spears. Another powerful general of the armies named Vajradanta rode in a chariot with 2 vultures and began to fight with arrows. Encouraged in the battle by those wicked generals, the 100 Akshohinis of soldiers gathered together playfully and fell on their enemies. Sarpini of evil activity adopted many mayas and created crores of serpents every moment. On seeing the army overpowered and unnerved in that manner, goddess Nakuli Mongoose became furious. Riding on Garuda, she jumped into the fray. She had the luster of the molten gold. She was born of the palate of Lalita. The entire realm of speech and language constituted her features. She was endowed with adamantine teeth. She dispatched her army towards Sarpini. Garuda, whose elevated shoulders were occupied by her, goddess Nakuli, and who could toss even mountains with his wings, moved ahead in the battleground like a mobile Sumeru. On seeing the dreadful serpents born of Maya of Sarpini, Nakuli had her eyes turned red due to anger, and she opened her mouth. Thereupon the tips of the 32 teeth of goddess Sri Nakuli Devi turned into 32 crores of mongooses with golden luster, cutting the groups of serpents of demoness Serpini into pieces by means of the crushing power of their carved teeth and neutralizing their poison. Golden ichneumons capable of dispelling poison wandered here and there in the course of that dreadful war, raising up their ears and shaking up their hairs on account of excessive fury, the elated mongooses opened their mouths and bit the serpents. For every one of the illusory serpents there arose an ichneumon, and it cut off the body of the serpent with the penetrating thrust of its sharp teeth. With their tongues resembling tender sprouts, the mongooses began licking up the two corners of their mouths that had become red due to the drops of blood exuding from the bodies of serpents. Then they jumped about and leapt in the battle. The excessively tremulous body of the serpents, while being bitten by the mongooses, quivered frequently along with the coiled hoods. In the course of the battle, the jewels stuck onto the weighty hoods of the serpents shone even after they had been beaten to death by the groups of mongooses. With their coiled hoods shattered and forced out by the blows of the mongooses, the serpents appeared like the flames of fires of their own great treachery, Mahadroha. The footnote says it also reads Mahakopa, fire of great anger or rage, a better reading. When the magical and illusory groups of serpents were thus broken into pieces by the sets of ichneumons, Serpini became excessively angry. After fighting a great battle with her, that goddess Nakuli fixed the extremely ruthless Garuda, having Garuda for its deity, missile to her arrow. That Garuda missile, which illuminated the faces of the quarters through formidable flames, entered the body of Sarpini and absorbed and extinguished the Sarpamaya. With the destruction of the Maya power, Sarpini got dissolved. On account of her destruction, the five excellent generals became furious. That Sarpini, by means of whose strength those generals contemptuously disregarded all the suras, was led to her death due to the prowess of mongooses or of goddess Nakuli. Hence, those generals became excessively furious on account of the loss of their powerful support. With a united effort, they showered goddess Nakuli by means of multitudes of weapons. Seated on her Garuda chariot, that heroine of the army fought with all the five, though she was alone. With great deals of dexterity, she showered weapons and missiles. She showered and welded thousands of missiles and weapons, such as spears with sharp edges, pistols, and javelins. With her adamantine teeth, she bit them in their weak and vulnerable vital parts. Thereupon the servants of the Daitya king yelled out dreadfully piteous cries of agony, as they were tortured by the mongooses of formidable power. Some of the mongooses, with blazing fury, leaped from the sky with terrible shrieks and began biting the army of their enemies. Some were bitten in their ears, others in their noses, still others were bitten on the tops of their heads. Some of the mongooses engaged in mutilating and disfiguring activities came and bit the backs of the demons. Those enemies of gods assailed by the mongooses fell down maimed and mutilated in their bodies, with their coats of mail broken through. Due to great fright, they cast off all their weapons. Some mongooses entered the open mouths of the enemies. They pulled at them as if they were bodies of serpents and bit the bottoms of their tongues. Other mongooses entered the ears of the enemies of the devas. Ichneumons of very small size entered the different pores of their bodies. On observing his own armies assailed and cast into wretched condition by the mongooses, Karanka became angry. The other extremely powerful and dexterous the other extremely powerful and dexterous generals of the army showered volleys of arrows on every ichneumon like the cloud showering waters. The arrows issuing forth from the mighty bows of the generals of the army of the Daityas came into violent clash with the tips of the teeth of ichneumons. Fire issued forth from the adamantine teeth of Ichneumon, struck and wounded by hundreds of volleys of arrows of the generals. The army of the Ichneumons was thrashed and shattered by those numerous arrows with shining tips jointly and playfully discharged by the five generals. With their bodies shattered and broken by the crores of arrows discharged here and there by the generals, the mongooses surrounded Nakuli. Thereupon goddess Nakuli, the sole deity of speech and language, identical with Saraswati, became very furious at the retreat of the mongooses. She fixed a great missile named Akshina Nakula, undiminishing, unending mongooses, to her saranga bow. The missile had faces points all round, and its tip was enveloped by flames of fire. Mongooses, crores in number, issued forth from that missile. They had adamantine limbs, hairs, and carved teeth. They were very swift. They had the intrinsic strength of thunderbolt. They moved ahead in a crowd. They were as terrible as numerous thunderbolts gathered together. They tore up the ground hurriedly with their adamantine claws. They appeared splendid with their eyes as lustrous as diamonds and other gems. The hissing sound they produced through their nostrils resembled that at the fall of thunderbolts. With the crores of their teeth they pounded and crushed the army of the demons. Free from the blame of mischievousness, they displayed many kinds of exploits, wounded and ruined in every limb by those crores of mighty mongooses as terrible as thunderbolt. The base Danavas began to perish. When the whole army that consisted of 100 Akshohinis at the beginning was struck down by the groups of ichneumons of adamantine power, the excellent generals found only themselves left behind. They were seized by great fright as well as anger. Drawing their bows, they fought more vigorously. Fighting with them in various ways, goddess Nakuli chopped off the hard head of Karanka by means of her sharp edged spear. Flying up seated on Garuda, she cut off with her sword the heads of the other four enemies, also of whom Kakava, Sita, was the chief. On seeing such an ease and active dexterity of goddess Nakuli, Shyamalambika honored that deity of great intrinsic strength who destroyed the wicked Asuras. Shyamambika granted to her the status of being her own satellite deity, who is not pleased and delighted when extremely good qualities are observed. The demons who escaped death became highly frightened. They sought refuge in Nakuli. On seeing them, she kindly said to them smilingly, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell your king the detailed news of the war." On being sent by her thus, they were delighted. They became afraid once again on seeing the battlefield. They immediately fled to the city of Shunyaka. On hearing the news from them, Bhanda became fierce on account of anger.